The council chamber on Prime had not seen such fear in 300 years. Representatives from 12 species sat in their designated seats, their translators humming with nervous chatter, their eyes fixed on the central platform where Ambassador stood with trembling hands. The diplomat was old by the standards of his people. His blue skin faded to a pale gray, his 4 eyes clouded with age. But his voice was strong as he addressed the gathered leaders. "The war with the Dominion has lasted longer than any of us have been alive," said. "Our worlds burn. Our children die before they learn to speak. We have tried everything. We have exhausted every weapon, every strategy, every alliance. And still still our people suffer." A representative hissed from across the chamber. "Your people started this war. Do not pretend to be victims." "We are all victims now," replied. "3 centuries of death have made victims of us all." The chamber fell silent. No one could argue with that truth. The war had consumed everything. Entire planets had been reduced to ash. Species that once numbered in the billions now struggled to fill a single colony ship. The galaxy was dying, and everyone in that room knew it. I reached into his robes and pulled out a small data crystal. "I have spent my entire life studying the ancient texts of our civilization, the stories our ancestors told before we reached the stars. And in those stories, I found something that I believe is our only hope." He activated the crystal, and a holographic image appeared above the central platform. It showed a creature standing on 2 legs, with 2 arms, a single head, and soft skin in various shades of brown and pink. The representatives leaned forward, studying the image with confusion. "This is a human," I said. Laughter erupted from several sections of the chamber. The Meridian delegate, a creature of living crystal, made a sound like breaking glass. "You waste our time with children's stories, Ambassador. Humans are myths, fairy tales told to frighten young ones." "I believed the same for most of my life," I admitted. "The stories seemed impossible. A species that evolved on a world of crushing gravity, where the very air burns with oxygen, where the central star bombards the surface with deadly radiation. A species that hunts by chasing prey until it collapses from exhaustion. That drinks a poison called alcohol for pleasure. That can survive the loss of limbs, the failure of organs, wounds that would kill any of us instantly." He paused and looked around the chamber. "I thought these were exaggerations, legends created to represent hope in hopeless times. But 3 days ago, one of our deep space probes detected something at the edge of charted space." The hologram changed, showing sensor readings and a grainy image of a ship unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It was blocky and utilitarian, without the elegant curves of design or the brutal angles of vessels. It looked like something built by creatures who cared more about function than beauty. "This ship was broadcasting in a language that matches the linguistic patterns described in the ancient texts," I continued. "We translated their transmissions. They call themselves humans. They come from a planet called Earth, and they are real." The chamber erupted in chaos. Representatives shouted over each other, demanding proof, dismissing the claim, arguing about what this could mean. I stood calmly at the center of it all, waiting for the noise to die down. When it finally did, the representative spoke again. "Even if these humans exist, why should we care? One primitive species from beyond charted space cannot change the course of a war that has lasted 300 years." I smiled, and there was something unsettling in that smile. "Let me tell you what the ancient texts say about humans. They say that a single human soldier, wounded and starving, held a mountain pass against an army for 3 days. They say that human healers can cut open a body, remove damaged organs, and replace them with organs from another human. They say that humans have walked on the surface of their moon, split the atom, and created thinking machines." He let those words hang in the air. "But most importantly, the texts say that humans are not cruel. They say that humans fight not for conquest but for protection. They say that when humans see suffering, they cannot look away. They must help. It is built into their very nature. The Meridian delegate leaned forward. You are suggesting we ask these mythical creatures to fight our war for us. I am suggesting we ask them for help, A replied. Something none of us have been willing to do for 300 years. The debate lasted for hours. Some representatives called the idea desperate foolishness. Others argued that desperation was all they had left. In the end, the vote passed by a narrow margin. An envoy would be sent to make contact with the humans and plead for their assistance. What none of them knew was that they had intercepted every word of that debate. In the flagship orbiting a dead world, War Commander studied the sensor readings of the human vessel with cold interest. If these creatures were real, if the myths contained even a grain of truth, then they could not be allowed to ally with the. They had to be found and destroyed before they could change the balance of power. Ordered his fastest ships to hunt for the human, the race had begun. On the other side of the galaxy, Commander Daniel Price stood on the bridge of the exploration vessel Endurance and watched the stars drift past. He was a tall man with tired eyes and gray hair at his temples, a veteran of conflicts he rarely spoke about. Beside him, Lieutenant Maya Collins monitored the communication systems, her fingers dancing across holographic controls. Picking up some unusual signals, Commander, she said. Definitely artificial, definitely not human. Price felt his heart beat faster. Humanity had searched for signs of intelligent life for centuries. They had found bacteria on Mars, simple organisms in the oceans of Europa, but never anything that could think, that could build, that could dream. Can you translate it? He asked. Collins shook her head. Not yet, but Commander, there is something strange. Some of the linguistic patterns match theoretical models we developed decades ago, almost like someone out there was trying to speak a language based on ours. Price stared at the stars and wondered what was waiting for them in the darkness. He had no way of knowing that across the galaxy, billions of creatures were whispering the name of his species like a prayer. He had no way of knowing that humanity was about to become the most important discovery in galactic history. All he knew was that first contact was coming, and nothing would ever be the same again. The envoy ship came out of faster-than-light travel in a cloud of sparks and smoke. Its hull was torn open in 3 places, its engines were failing, and its crew was dying. Lieutenant Maya Collins was the first to spot it on the sensors, a small vessel tumbling through space like a leaf in a storm. Commander, we have a ship in distress, she reported. Unknown design. Life signs are fading. Commander Daniel Price did not hesitate. Bring us alongside. Prepare for rescue operations. The crew of the Endurance moved with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, they had matched speed with the damaged vessel and extended a docking tube. Captain Gregory Shaw led the rescue team personally, his boots clanging against metal as he crossed into the alien ship. What he found inside would stay with him for the rest of his life. There were small creatures, barely reaching his chest, with 4 eyes and skin the color of a summer sky. Most of them were dead, killed by the explosion that had torn through their ship. But 3 survived, huddled in a corner of what remained of their bridge, staring at Shaw with an expression he could not read. It is real, one of them whispered in broken English. The myth is real. Shaw did not understand what that meant. He simply reached down and lifted the nearest into his arms, carrying the wounded alien back to the Endurance like a father carrying a child. The weighed almost nothing to him, and it stared up at his face with something that looked like wonder. Dr. Lisa Warren met them in the medical bay. She was a small woman with steady hands and kind eyes, the best Dr. Shaw had ever served with. She looked at the wounded aliens and immediately began working, scanning their bodies with human instruments, trying to understand their biology in real time. Their blood is copper-based, she muttered. Atmospheric requirements are different from ours but within tolerance. I can stabilize them. One of the one who had spoken earlier, grabbed her arm with surprising strength. "You touch us without protection. You breathe our air. The legends said you could do this, but I did not believe." Warren gently removed his hand and continued her work. "I do not know what legends you are talking about, friend, but right now I need you to hold still so I can help you." Over the next few hours, the truth came out. The surviving explained everything. The 300-year war, the dying galaxy, the ancient myths about a species called humans that most people believed were nothing more than stories, and the desperate hope that had driven them across the stars to find the creatures from legend. Commander Price listened to all of it in silence. When the finished, he sat back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. "You are telling me that we are famous throughout the galaxy, that people tell stories about us." "Not famous," the ambassador said. "His name was and he had somehow survived the attack that killed most of his crew. Mythical. Most of my people believe humans do not exist. They believe you are symbols, representations of hope created by our collective imagination. To see you standing before me, breathing, speaking, is like seeing a god step out of a holy book." Lieutenant Collins leaned forward. "What do these myths say about us?" A's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. "They say you are impossible, that you come from a world so dangerous it should not support life, that your bodies can heal wounds that would kill any other species, that you can run for days without stopping, survive extreme temperatures, consume poisons for pleasure, that you conquered your own moon and split the atom." He paused and looked around at the human crew. "They also say you are kind, that you cannot see suffering without trying to help, that you protect those who cannot protect themselves. That is why we came looking for you. We need your help." Before Price could respond, the alarms began to scream. Collins checked her console and went pale. "Commander, we have 6 ships incoming. They match the configuration that attacked the vessel." Though said, fear flooding his voice. "They followed us." Price stood and walked to the main. 6 warships were dropping out of faster-than-light travel, their weapons already glowing with charged energy. They were 3 times the size of the Endurance, built for war, bristling with guns. A transmission came through. The face that appeared on screen was reptilian, covered in dark scales with eyes like pools of black oil. "Human vessel, I am War Commander of the Dominion. You will surrender the criminals in your custody immediately. Refuse and you will be destroyed." Price looked at the screen for a long moment. Then he looked at the wounded aliens in his medical bay, at the crew who trusted him with their lives. He thought about everything he had just learned, about myths and legends and a galaxy drowning in war. "War Commander," he said calmly, "I am Commander Daniel Price of the human vessel Endurance. These people came to us asking for help. I will not hand them over to be killed." Made a sound that might have been laughter. "You have no idea what you are involving yourself in, human. This war has lasted longer than your species has had. Stand aside or die." "I have a third option," Price replied. "You leave right now, and no one has to die today." The commander ended the transmission without another word. Seconds later, his ships opened fire on the damaged vessel still floating beside the Endurance. The small ship exploded instantly, killing the remaining crew members who had been too wounded to evacuate. Price watched the debris scatter across space. He thought of the who had crossed the galaxy looking for help. He thought of the stories they told about humanity, and he felt something cold settle in his chest. "Lieutenant Collins," he said quietly, "open a channel to Earth. Tell them we have made first contact and we are under attack." Then he turned to Captain Shaw. "Battle stations. Let us show these creatures what happens when they mistake kindness for weakness." The Endurance was an exploration ship, not a warship. It had minimal weapons, light armor, and a crew trained for science rather than combat. But it was crewed by humans. And humans had been fighting against impossible odds since the first cave dweller picked up a rock to defend his family. The battle lasted 11 minutes. When it was over, 3 warships were burning wreckage, and the other 3 were fleeing at maximum speed. The Endurance had taken damage but remained functional. Commander Price stood on his bridge, breathing hard, and wondered what he had just started. In his medical bay, watched the battle footage with tears streaming from all 4 of his eyes. The myths were true. The humans were real. And for the first time in 300 years, he felt something he had almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. The colony world of 4 had been under siege for 8 months. Its cities were ruins. Its fields were ash. Its people huddled in underground shelters, waiting for death that seemed more certain with each passing day. General stood on what remained of the Planetary Defense Command, watching the bombardment light up the night sky, and tried to remember what hope felt like. Then the human ships arrived. There were only 5 of them, small vessels compared to the fleet that surrounded the planet. But they cut through the blockade like knives through silk, their weapons firing with a precision that made gunners gasp in disbelief. Within hours, the fleet had pulled back to regroup, and the human ships were landing on the surface. When I meet them personally, he had heard the stories that were spreading across the galaxy like wildfire. Humans were real. Humans had destroyed warships. Humans were coming to help. But hearing stories was different from seeing the truth with your own eyes. The first human to step off the transport ship was Commander Daniel Price, the man who had become famous throughout the galaxy in just a few weeks. He was tall by standards, his body thick with muscle, his eyes carrying a weight that recognized from his own reflection. Behind him came 2,000 human soldiers, volunteers who had traveled across the stars to fight in a war that was not their own. "General," Price said, extending his hand in what had learned was a human greeting. "We are here to help." Took the hand and felt the strength in it, the rough calluses, the warmth of human skin. "Commander Price, I must be honest with you. I have read the reports, but I still do not understand why you came. This is not your war. These are not your people." Price looked around at the ruined city, the smoke rising from 100 fires, the refugees moving through the streets like ghosts. "General, where I come from, we have a saying. The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. We could not do nothing." The human soldiers spread out across the defensive lines, and everything began to change. Sergeant Victor was assigned to hold the mountain pass north of the capital, a strategic position that controlled access to the civilian shelters. He had 12 soldiers under his command and orders to hold the pass at all costs. When the attack came, he was facing 200 enemy warriors. The observers expected the humans to retreat. The odds were impossible. No species could hold against such numbers. But the humans did not retreat. And his soldiers fought for 18 hours straight. They took wounds that would have killed any instantly. One soldier continued fighting with a metal fragment embedded in his chest. Another kept firing her weapon even after losing 3 fingers to a plasma blast. They did not stop. They did not slow down. They held the pass until reinforcements arrived, and when the battle was over, not a single warrior had gotten through. The soldiers who witnessed this could not explain what they had seen. They called it impossible. They called it miraculous, but the humans just called it duty. Meanwhile, in the field hospitals behind the lines, medic Christina Holt was performing miracles of a different kind. She had trained as a combat medic on Earth, learning to save lives in conditions that would make most people vomit. Now she applied those skills to wounded soldiers of 2 species, working for days without sleep, her hands steady even as exhaustion tried to claim her. A soldier was brought to her with wounds that his own doctors had declared fatal. His chest had been torn open by shrapnel, his internal organs damaged beyond what medicine could repair. His doctors had already begun the rituals for the dying. Holt looked at the wound, grabbed her surgical kit, and got to work. For 4 hours she operated on the alien soldier, using techniques that surgeons watched with disbelief. She removed the damaged tissue, repaired what could be repaired, and improvised solutions for problems she had never faced before. When she finally stepped back, covered in blue blood, the soldier was stable. "How is this possible?" the chief surgeon asked. "You do not know our biology. You do not have the proper equipment. You should not have been able to save him." Holt wiped the blood from her hands and smiled tiredly. "On Earth, we learn to make do with what we have. When someone is dying in front of you, you do not have time to wait for perfect conditions." As the days turned into weeks, the tide of battle shifted. The humans fought with a ferocity that shocked thee and inspired the. But more than their fighting ability, it was their endurance that changed everything. They operated in gravity that forced to wear powered armor. They marched through terrain that would have exhausted any other species. They suffered injuries that should have been fatal and kept going. Word spread through the ranks. The myths were true. The humans were everything the legends said and more. Soldiers who had fought without fear for 300 years began to hesitate. Officers who had never known doubt began to question their orders. Generals stood beside Commander Price on the day that began their retreat. The enemy fleet was withdrawing from orbit, their ground forces falling back to their ships, their siege of 4 ending not with a decisive battle, but with a collective loss of nerve. "They are not retreating because we defeated them," said quietly. "They are retreating because they are afraid." Price nodded. "Fear is a powerful weapon, General, sometimes more powerful than any gun." "What happens now? You have shown the galaxy that humans are real. You have proven that the myths are true. Every species in the galaxy will be watching to see what you do next." Price looked up at the sky, where the ships were disappearing one by one. "I do not know, General. A few weeks ago, my people did not even know alien life existed. Now we are in the middle of a war that has lasted 3 centuries. We are learning as we go." "The galaxy has been waiting for you," said. "Whether you know it or not, whether you wanted it or not, your people have become the most important discovery in the history of our civilization. The myth made flesh, the legend brought to life." Price turned to look at the general, and there was something complicated in his eyes. "That is what worries me, General. Legends are not people. Myths do not bleed, do not make mistakes, do not have bad days. My soldiers are just men and women trying to do the right thing. I hope the galaxy can accept us for what we really are, not just what they want us to be." Had no answer for that. But as he watched the human soldiers celebrate their victory, laughing and embracing and crying with relief, he thought that perhaps the reality of humanity was even more impressive than the myth. Because myths did not choose to help strangers. Myths did not cross the stars to fight for people they had never met. Only real beings with real hearts and real courage could do that. And that, he realized, was the most miraculous thing of all. The news of human involvement in the Galactic War spread faster than light itself. On 1,000 worlds, beings of every shape and size watched footage of human soldiers holding impossible positions, human medics saving lives that should have been lost, human ships destroying fleets that outnumbered them 10 to 1. Some watched with hope, others watched with fear, and some watched with a darker emotion altogether. On Earth, Secretary General Blake sat in his office and tried to process the flood of communications arriving from across the galaxy. Species he had never heard of were sending messages of gratitude, pleas for help, warnings of danger, and threats of retaliation. Humanity had stepped onto the galactic stage, and there was no stepping back. "We have requests for military assistance from 47 different worlds," his aide reported. "We have 3 formal alliance proposals, 2 declarations of war, and 17 species asking if they can send pilgrims to Earth to see the birthplace of the legendary humans." Blake rubbed his temples. "Pilgrims, they want to visit Earth like it is some kind of holy site." To many of them, it is. The ancient texts describe Earth as the origin world of the gods. Some species have been praying to humans for thousands of years. Blake did not know whether to laugh or cry. 6 months ago, humanity had been alone in the universe. Now they were apparently the answer to prayers they had never known existed. Meanwhile, on the neutral station of Meridian Cross, Commander Daniel Price and Lieutenant Maya Collins were making a discovery that would change everything. Collins had been studying the ancient texts that mentioned humans, trying to understand how stories about Earth had spread across the galaxy before humanity had even developed writing. The linguistic patterns were familiar in ways they should not have been. The descriptions of human physiology were too accurate to be coincidence. Something was very wrong with the standard explanation. "Commander," she said, her voice shaking slightly, "I need to show you something." She led him to a private research room and activated her holographic display. Images filled the air, ancient carvings and paintings from a dozen different worlds, all depicting creatures that looked remarkably human. "These images are millions of years old," Collins explained. "Long before any of these civilizations had, long before they had contact with each other. But they all show the same thing: humans, or something very much like humans." Price stared at the images. "That is impossible. Humans evolved on Earth. We have the fossil record to prove it." "Humans evolved on Earth," Collins agreed. "But we were not the first. Look at this." She pulled up a translation of a text so old that most of its language had been lost to time. "This is from the Sacred Archives. It describes a species called the Firstborn who existed millions of years ago. They traveled the stars, seeded life on countless worlds, and built civilizations that spanned the galaxy. And then they disappeared." She zoomed in on a particular passage. The Firstborn were described as walking on two legs, with two arms, a single head, and skin in shades of brown and pink. They were said to be curious, compassionate, and endlessly creative. They were said to protect the weak and challenge the strong. Price felt cold despite the warmth of the station. "You are saying that humans existed before, that we are some kind of second generation." "I am saying that the myths about humans are not myths. They are memories. Somehow, human life evolved again on Earth, millions of years after the Firstborn disappeared. We are their descendants, separated by an ocean of time but connected by something deeper than genetics." This discovery raised more questions than it answered. Where had the Firstborn gone? Why had they disappeared? And why had life taken the same form again on Earth, as if some cosmic force wanted humans to exist? But before Price could explore these questions, a more immediate crisis demanded his attention. The Emperor Eth had secretly reached out to human representatives. Unlike his generals and admirals, Eth was tired of war. He had inherited the conflict from his father, who had inherited it from his father, stretching back through generations that had forgotten why they were fighting. He wanted peace, but he could not say so openly without being overthrown by his own military. His message was simple. He proposed a secret meeting with human mediators to discuss ending the war. The humans would be neutral parties, trusted by neither side but feared by both. If anyone could broker peace, it was them. Price agreed to the meeting, but intelligence had informants everywhere, and word of the proposal reached High Matriarcha within hours. She saw the meeting not as an opportunity for peace, but as a threat to interests. If humans negotiated directly with they might reach an agreement that left the out in the cold. More dangerous still were the extremists within her own government. A faction of believed that humans were becoming too powerful, too influential, too important. They feared that the galaxy would soon orbit around Earth rather than around interests, and they decided to act. The assassination attempt came without warning. Price was meeting with diplomats when a plasma bolt burned through the air, missing his head by inches. His security team reacted instantly, surrounding him, weapons drawn, scanning for the shooter. But the assassin was already gone, disappeared into the crowded corridors of the diplomatic quarter. The would-be killer was caught 3 hours later. She was a military officer named Ra, a decorated veteran who had lost her entire family to the Under interrogation, she admitted that she had acted on orders from a faction within the High Command who believed that humans were a threat to galactic stability. "You saved our world," she spat at Price during their only meeting. "But you also showed everyone that are not the strongest species in the galaxy anymore. For 300 years, we have defined ourselves by this war. Without it, what are we? And with humans taking our place as the galaxy's protectors, what happens to us?" Price looked at her with something like sadness. "We did not come here to replace anyone. We came to help." "Help," she repeated bitterly. "That is what makes you so dangerous, Commander. You help without asking for anything in return. You fight without demanding tribute. You save lives without counting the cost. No species in the history of the galaxy has ever done that. It terrifies us. Because if humans are truly as good as the legends say, then what does that make the rest of us?" The assassination attempt complicated everything. Trust between humans and fractured. The secret peace summit was in danger of collapsing before it even began. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, a strike force was preparing to ensure that humans and never got the chance to talk. Price sat alone in his quarters that night, staring at the stars outside his window. He thought about the weight of expectation pressing down on him. The galaxy saw humans as myths made flesh, legends given life, saviors from the darkness. But he was just a man, just a tired soldier trying to do the right thing in a universe that seemed determined to make that impossible. His communicator buzzed. It was Collins. "Commander, we have a problem. Our sensors have detected a fleet moving toward the coordinates of the peace summit. They will arrive before the meeting can take place." Price closed his eyes and let out a long breath. Then he stood, straightened his uniform, and prepared to face another impossible situation. "Get me a channel to the High Matriarch," he said, "and prepare our ships for departure. If they want to stop this peace summit, they are going to have to go through us first." The neutral moon hung in the darkness between empires, a small gray world that belonged to no one and therefore belonged to everyone. It was here, in a bunker buried beneath kilometers of rock, that the fate of the galaxy would be decided. Commander Daniel Price stood at the head of the conference table, watching representatives of two species that had been killing each other for 300 years sit down across from one another. On one side, Emperor Eth, a massive reptilian figure whose scales had faded with age and whose eyes held the weariness of a ruler who had seen too much death. On the other side, a delegation led by diplomats loyal to peace, though conspicuously lacking their High Matriarch. "Thank you for coming," Price said. "I know this was not easy for any of you, but I believe we have a chance here to end 3 centuries of suffering." Eth made a sound that might have been a bitter laugh. "Chance. That is a generous word, Commander. My own admirals would kill me if they knew I was here. They have a fleet racing to destroy this summit. And even if we reach an agreement, there are those on both sides who will never accept peace." "Then let us give them no choice," Price replied. "Let us make peace so real, so visible, so undeniable, that refusing it becomes impossible." Lieutenant Maya Collins activated her holographic display, filling the room with images and documents she had spent weeks compiling. "I have been researching the origins of this war. The historical records are fragmented and contradictory, but I believe I have found the truth." She pulled up an ancient recording, the image grainy and distorted by time. It showed a vessel approaching a colony, weapons powered but not firing. A miscommunication, a panicked response, and suddenly both sides were shooting. Within hours, the misunderstanding had become a massacre. Within weeks, the massacre had become a war. "This is the first battle of the conflict," Collins said. "An exploration ship entered space looking for a lost survey team. They who had never encountered before interpreted their weapon's signature as a prelude to attack. They fired first. They responded, and neither side ever stopped to ask what had actually happened." The room was silent. Eth stared at the recording with something like disbelief. "We were not attacking. We were searching for our missing people." And they did not know that, Collins replied gently. They were afraid. They made a mistake. And then both sides were too proud, too hurt, too angry to admit that the whole thing had been a terrible accident. One of the diplomats spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. 300 years, billions dead, entire worlds reduced to ash, and it started because of a misunderstanding. Wars often do, Price said. On Earth, we have fought countless wars over things just as foolish, borders drawn by strangers, resources that could have been shared, pride that could have been swallowed. We are not so different from you. Ed leaned forward, his massive claws resting on the table. You speak as if you understand us, Commander, but you are the mythical humans, the perfect species. The legends say you are beyond such petty conflicts. Price met the Emperor's eyes without flinching. The legends are wrong. We are not perfect. We are not gods. We are just people who have made every mistake you have made and more. The only difference is that we have learned slowly and painfully that peace is always better than war. Not because war is wrong, but because war is expensive. It costs too much. It takes too much. And in the end, someone has to stop fighting and start talking, or everyone loses. Before anyone could respond, the alarms began to sound. The strike force had arrived. Admiral A commanded the fleet from her flagship, watching the neutral moon grow larger on her. She had her orders from the government. Destroy the peace summit. Eliminate the Emperor. And if the humans got in the way, destroy them too. But when she dropped out of faster-than-light travel, she found the human fleet waiting for her. A dozen ships, small compared to her armada, positioned directly between her weapons and the summit location. A communication came through. Commander Price's face appeared on her screen, calm and steady. Admiral A, I know why you are here. I know what you have been ordered to do. But I am asking you, one soldier to another, to stop and think about what comes next. Stand aside, human, A replied. This is not your war. These are not your people. You have no right to interfere. You are correct. This is not our war, but we have made it our responsibility. We came to this galaxy looking for new friends, and instead we found an ancient wound that has been bleeding for centuries. We cannot heal that wound. Only you can do that, but we can stand here and give you the chance to try. A's finger hovered over the firing control. If you do not move, I will destroy you. Maybe, Price admitted. You have more ships, more guns, more soldiers. But before you give that order, I want you to consider something. 3 centuries ago, your ancestors made a mistake that cost billions of lives. Today, you have the chance to make a different choice. You can be the one who ended the war, or you can be the one who made sure it never ended. History will remember either way. The bridge of the flagship was silent. Every officer was watching their admiral, waiting for her command. A thought about her family, killed in a raid when she was young. She thought about the soldiers she had led into battle, the ones who had not come home. She thought about 300 years of hatred and pain and loss. And then she thought about her daughter, born just 2 years ago, who might grow up in a galaxy at peace if only someone was brave enough to stop fighting. Her hand moved away from the firing control. All ships, she said quietly, stand down. On the neutral moon below, the peace summit continued. It took 3 days of difficult negotiations, but in the end, a ceasefire was declared. Not a permanent peace, not yet, but a beginning. A chance for wounds to heal and trust to grow. High Matriarcha, watching the broadcast from her throne room, did not order her admiral's arrest. Instead, she sent a message of congratulations to the summit and began preparing her own journey too. If peace was coming, she wanted to be part of it. Commander Price stood on the surface of the neutral moon, watching the first joint human patrol ship launch into orbit. Beside him, Lieutenant Collins was already working on translating the peace treaty into all 12 galactic languages. We did it, she said softly. I was not sure we could, but we did it. Price shook his head. They did it. We just stood in the middle and refused to move. Sometimes that is all it takes, someone willing to stand in the middle and say that enough is enough. Price thought about everything that had happened since the Endurance first detected alien signals at the edge of charted space. He thought about the myths and legends that had spread across the galaxy, the stories of impossible humans from a death world who fought like demons and healed like angels. He thought about how much those stories had gotten wrong. Humans were not gods, they were not perfect. They made mistakes, held grudges, fought wars just as pointless as this one. But they also learned. They also grew. And sometimes, when the situation demanded it, they could be brave enough to choose peace over pride. The galaxy had waited millions of years for humanity to return, not because they needed warriors or healers or builders, but because they needed someone to remind them that change was possible, that enemies could become friends, that the future did not have to be a copy of the past. As the sun set over the neutral moon, casting long shadows across the ancient stone, Price allowed himself a small smile. The legend of humanity was just beginning, but for the first time he was not afraid of what it might become. Because the real myth, he realized, was never about human strength or human endurance or human skill. It was about the human capacity to look at a stranger and see a friend, to look at an enemy and see a future ally, to look at a universe full of darkness and choose to bring light. That was the legend worth living up to, and humanity, finally, was ready to try.